Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are opening up a core framework from Dr. Avinash Kumar Gupta's course, Clinical Cognition from First Principles. Specifically, we're diving into Lesson 4, Bias and Failure Modes. Think of our time together today as, well, performing a cognitive autopsy, right? We aren't just looking at a final medical diagnosis. Instead, we are dissecting exactly how and where human reasoning fundamentally breaks down. It's a deep, deep look right into the invisible engine of the mind. Here is our agenda for today. We're going to systematically examine 5 key points where clinical reasoning collapses: the clinical failure surface, the moment of commitment, signal, noise, and weight, distortion at the handoff, and finally, the retrospective audit. Okay, let's dive straight into part 1, the clinical failure surface. So, to really grasp this concept, we have to treat clinical reasoning like a tangible architectural structure, one that has a measurable failure surface. As Dr. Gupta establishes right out of the gate, we're studying how clinical reasoning actually moves, not just what conclusion it reaches. We're tracking that invisible movement of the mind from raw observation all the way to a finalized judgment, looking for the exact stress points where the structure starts to crack. Now, what's really interesting about this is how Dr. Gupta maps out the taxonomy of this failure surface into 5 distinct angles. We've got the moment of commitment, the load-bearing finding, signal versus noise, distortion at handoff, and the retrospective audit. These are basically the 5 distinct pressure points where bias just kind of sneaks in. Moving right along to number 2, the moment of commitment. When exactly does a theory become a conviction? I mean, it's a really powerful Socratic question, right? This is the exact moment where the foundation of a diagnosis is poured. And the problem? Sometimes it gets poured way too fast. In clinical cognition, there's this precise, often totally unnoticed psychological instant where a practitioner just stops exploring alternatives and locks into a single diagnosis. And if that snap happens prematurely, boom, the entire reasoning structure is instantly compromised by confirmation bias. That brings us to part 3, signal, noise, and weight. Because once that conviction is actually formed, we face the classic battle in medicine, which is signal versus noise. We have to figure out exactly which data points are actually holding up the clinical theory and which are just, well, distractions. The signal is the critical, true information pointing directly to the correct diagnosis. The noise, that's the irrelevant data just clouding our judgment. Think about it like a house. If you build your cognitive house on noise, it is absolutely going to collapse. And this perfectly tees up the concept of a load-bearing finding. So the crucial point here is, just like a load-bearing wall in a physical house, you knock it down and the roof literally caves in. In clinical reasoning, this is that one specific piece of evidence. It could be a singular lab result or maybe a highly unique symptom, but it acts as the primary pillar for the entire clinical theory. Just look at how precarious this weight distribution actually is. I mean, a massive 85% of a clinician's conviction can rest on just one single test result. That is wild. If that specific load-bearing finding is flawed or misinterpreted or maybe just flat out wrong, the whole cognitive structure suffers a total collapse. You absolutely 100% must know where the weight of your diagnostic argument lives. All right, part 4, distortion at the handoff. Let's move to this next phase and see how this builds, because this is an incredibly dangerous time. Why? Because the reasoning is no longer contained safely in just one person's head. As the reasoning trace leaves one clinician at, say, hour 0 and is relayed onward to the next shift at hour 8 and beyond, the original thought inevitably gets distorted. It's literally like a high-stakes game of telephone. The nuance, the nagging doubts, the alternative theories, they often get entirely stripped away at each handoff. Actually, this ties directly into Lesson 5's focus on patient advocacy. Translating the reasoning trace isn't just about handing over a final piece of paper at the end of a shift. It's about structured, longitudinal state logging. You really have to clearly translate the how and the why. Documenting the actual reasoning is what protects the patient from that distortion of the relay. And finally, part 5, the retrospective audit. Let's slow our pacing down for a second here, because this is where the process becomes intensely analytical. A full retrospective audit is this vital practice of turning the discipline of clinical cognition inward. We review the entire reasoning trace, step by step, to spot exactly where the structural integrity held up and exactly where it cracked. Did we lock in too early? Did we maybe rely on a weak load-bearing finding? It's a rigorous, entirely blameless self-critique.
Now, it's super important to remember that understanding these 5 biases doesn't just happen in a vacuum. This auditing is a critical part of the course's core 9-lesson cognitive loop. From initial observation to differential building, all the way to this specific bias check, all of these elements work together seamlessly to build a vastly safer, way more robust engine of clinical reasoning.
So I want to wrap up this explainer with one final, deeply provocative question derived from Lesson 13 of the course. Are you auditing your own compressed intuition? Think about that for a second. In your daily decision-making, whether you're in a clinic or just going about your life, are you truly examining the invisible steps your mind took to arrive at an answer? Or are you just blindly trusting your gut? It's a fantastic concept to reflect on, and honestly, a real game changer if you put it into practice. Thanks so much for exploring this cognitive architecture with me today, and as always, keep your mind open to how we think.